è la crisi più difficile che il Paese sta vivendo dal secondo dopoguerra. La decisione assunta dal governo è quella di chiudere nell'intero territorio nazionale ogni attività produttiva che non sia strettamente necessaria, cruciale, indispensabile a garantirci beni, servizi essenziali.
我看到不幸，也看到勇敢；我看到灾难，也看到有爱。我想说，虽然这个冬天有点长，但是我相信春天一定回来的。
There's one thing that I can tell you about this. It is much more aggressive in its transmission than anything that we have seen in recent history. It's probably more akin to the 1918 pandemic. Every company should be cognizant of the fact that you may have to alter your travel. You may have to look at your employees and judge whether the trip they're making to Europe is essential or whether it can be done on video conference. Why risk it?
抖音
We've had a couple of employees, count them on one hand, who have positive tests. We've handled those exactly the way we're asking every American to respond to those wherever they find themselves in the world.
A little bit later. It's your fault that people are freaking out here. I don't even blame the Chinese. I don't blame them at all. They did everything right. It's you all that are hyping things up. Goodbye. Have a good morning.
China built dozens of hospitals in literally like a month. How? The Chinese government came in and said, we're going to do this, we're going to nationalize it. It makes all the sense in the world, and by the way, we have no option.
谢谢中国给我们做一个好的榜样，请为我们美国加油祈祷，美国加油。
Ambulance system of death from pneumonia that the CDC has. It's not in every city, every state, every hospital.
So we could have people in the United States dying for what appears to be influenza when in fact it could be the coronavirus or COVID-19.
Some cases have been actually diagnosed.
Well, I think China is very, professionally run in the sense that they have everything under control. I really believe they are going to have it under control fairly soon. In April, supposedly, it dies with the hotter weather, and that's a beautiful date to look forward to.
Data China has been sharing with the United States has been helpful.
I think it has been helpful. We've been working very much with China, spoken, as you know, with President Xi. They went through hell, and their numbers are starting to look very good. They're really looking very good. We're very happy about that.
Nearly 200 dead, 14,000 who are sick, millions, as you witnessed, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead. I think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people. The American people are looking for answers, and they're looking for hope. And you're doing sensationalism. That's really bad reporting.
China, an authoritarian state. Italy, freedom. Western freedoms.
Oh, okay. The things we prize are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right?
Right.
If you don't have life, you can't do much with the other two. That's basically the argument that the WHO is making in explaining the success of China. You have to save lives, you have to save lives, you have to save lives.
Fiasco, which I think stands alongside the testing fiasco, to me feels like a point that's worthy of focus because it seems more fixable. The testing thing, we obviously screwed that up royally as a country. They are trying to scale it up. A lot of effort is going into that. It's still going to take a long time, and it will hamper our efforts until we've got it in place. Meanwhile, without testing, all we can do is large-scale mitigation efforts, like getting rid of crowds, telling people not to fly, other things like that. But also people who believe they've been exposed should quarantine. Would clear federal standards on how to quarantine and under what circumstances help?
That's not the right approach anyway. Okay. You don't want infected people or suspected infected people with their families. They'll just pass it on to them. China has had enormous success in beating down its epidemic. We don't know what's going to happen when China tries to reopen its economy and let people go back to the factories and back to the subways and back to offices and restaurants and everything else. We don't know what's going to happen, and they're going to do it in a very slow, graduated way, but they have been in lockdown all this time. But we see the drone shots from these cities and we think, ooh, lockdown, it looks terrible, there's no traffic on the street. That's not the point of what they did. They had to do that in order to introduce the measures they were going to take that were actually going to fight the epidemic. And that is testing, 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 testing. Find the virus. So one thing is, no matter where you go, if you are able to get out of the house in there, you know, if you go into any building, your temperature is taken. I came into this building, nobody took my temperature. They asked me some silly questions I could have lied about. But, you know, you get your fever taken. You get into a bus, your temperature is taken. You walk into the train station, your temperature is taken. You walk into the building, you walk back to your apartment building, your temperature is taken.
And what happens if you show a fever?
Then you're sent to a fever clinic. People are not sent to their own doctor's offices. Your doctor's office is dangerous. One of those tests will make you cough, usually cough or gag, and then you've infected the doctor. And then the doctor's office is out, and you've possibly infected everybody else in the waiting room. So they are sent to specific fever clinics, which the Chinese have had since they battled SARS back in 2002. They designed these and basically mothballed them. It's usually an entrance to a hospital. It's separate from the main entrance. They're met by people in complete protective gear. The temperature is taken. They're asked quickly what their symptoms are, whether they've been exposed, how they've been exposed. They get a quick white blood cell count, which takes about half an hour to see whether or not they have bacterial pneumonia. It doesn't tell you what the bacteria is, but it tells you whether or not you've likely got that. They get a quick flu test to see if they have flu. If you've got one of those, maybe you can be excluded and go home. You're something else. But if you don't have either one of those, then you're given a CT scan. CT scans in this country take half an hour to an hour, and they're, you know, extremely expensive things. There they have portable CT scanners. They have pushed people through those things at the rate of 200 a day. A couple of slices of the lungs, and that's all, to see whether or not there are these ground glass opacities in both lungs that are a pretty good indication of this. All right. If you come up positive for that, then you are going to get a PCR test, which is the test we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. It's basically a nasal swab is the usual way to do it, which is push a Q-tip up your nose so far it feels like it's going into your brain. It's not very pleasant, but then they do that on site. They've gotten it down to 4 hours. There's no sending it off to the state health department.
So you sit and wait for it to come back.
And you sit and wait. You are told, sit, you know, a couple of yards apart from everybody else. People sitting there, it was described to me, they're sitting there with their pink envelopes with their CT scans inside them, and they're afraid of each other because they all know that they might be, you know, they might be sitting next to somebody who's got the virus. And once the scan results come back, and if they can't get the scan results back that day, they have to go to a hotel, a quarantine hotel, and wait until the results come back.
Apart from their family.
Apart from their family. And that is the key element. There is no home isolation. There is no home quarantine. 75 to 80% of the transmission in China was in family clusters. What would make the news was things like, oh my God, it's in the prisons. Oh my God, it's in Parliament, or whatever. It wasn't in Parliament there, but you'd hear these kind of, but 75 to 80% of it was inside the family. And they knew they had to stop that if they're going to stop the disease. So people were literally quickly taken away from their families to these giant gymnasiums or stadiums where they were not concentration camps. They were beds, you know, there, and there were nurses in protective gear to watch out for people. They even had dance classes in these things. Because when you have lots of little old ladies sort of sitting there together waiting to see if they're okay, if you get them all up dancing, one, it helps clear their lungs if they have pneumonia, and the people who can't get up may be the ones who are crashing. It's not a bad policy. We laugh at the pictures when you see people dancing in what look like moon suits, but in fact, that was something medically smart that was going on. If people actually need to be hospitalized, you know, the people who don't need to be hospitalized are the ones in the so-called 80% of mild cases. I'm sorry I ever used that expression when I wrote that first article, because mild, when you look carefully at the study, is everything from almost no symptoms to pneumonia, but doesn't need oxygen, doesn't need hospitalization.
Wow.
Now, I've had pneumonia. I've had walking pneumonia. That was not like having a mild cold. That was serious. I had it about 2 weeks different from when Hillary Clinton got it. You saw her collapse on the street. She had to be carried into her van when she collapsed. I was standing on third base playing softball with some friends and thought, I'm going to collapse here. And, you know, went to the doctor the next day. So those are the cases. They're isolated away. They're hospitalized. People actually sort of move through the system. Suspect cases, mild to moderate cases, and hospitalized, severe, and critical cases who are actually in hospitals. And the crucial thing about that system is break the chains of transmission and also do what you can to keep the hospitals from getting overwhelmed. Because when the hospitals get overwhelmed, you have to say, okay, she lives, but he dies, and he dies, or whatever. You know, she's young and has kids, we'll save her. Grandmother, goodbye. Those are the choices they are making in northern Italy right now, and they're going to be making them all over Italy pretty soon. And we will too.
Donald McNeil, science and health reporter for the New York Times. People are going to clip this and send it to their local health department for having you describe this because of the distance between what you're describing and what we're doing and what we're preparing for. But thank you. Donald McNeil, reporter for the New York Times. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. They were not concentration camps. They were beds, there, and there were nurses in protective gear to watch out for people. They even had dance classes and these things. It's not a bad policy. We laugh at the pictures when you see people dancing in what look like moon suits, but in fact, that was something medically smart that was going on. China has had enormous success in beating down an epidemic.
The things we prize are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right?
Right.
If you don't have life, you can't do much with the other two. That's basically the argument that the WHO is making in explaining the success of China. You have to save lives, you have to save lives, you have to save lives. And temporarily, yes, people are going to be inconvenienced.
China has had enormous success in beating down its epidemic. And they knew they had to stop that if they're going to stop the disease. So people were literally quickly taken away from their families to these giant gymnasiums or stadiums where they were beds, there, and there were nurses in protective gear to watch out for people. They even had dance classes and these things. It's not a bad policy. We laugh at the pictures when you see people dancing in what look like moon suits, but in fact, that was something medically smart that was going on. The crucial thing about that system is break the chains of transmission and also do what you can to keep the hospitals from getting overwhelmed. Because when the hospitals get overwhelmed, you have to say, okay, she lives, but he dies and he dies. She's young and has kids, we'll save her. Grandmother, goodbye. Those are the choices they are making in northern Italy right now, and they're going to be making them all over Italy pretty soon. And we will too.